And I think that's really what we've been talking a lot with, different clients and students. We've talked a lot about how you're wired as a personality, to know yourself, how you interface with others. And it's like, okay, great. I know this now, Joel and Antonia. What do I do with that? Where do I go with it? And that's really where self-leadership comes in. How do you know what to do with the knowledge of personality type? Let's just take the 4 judging cognitive functions of personality. So these are the 4 different ways that people make decisions or evaluate criteria in the world. And these are I think the best way to look through leadership as a real cursory beginning point for that. When we talk about leadership and we think of it in terms of structure and hierarchy and accomplishing something in the outside world, getting the job done, accomplishing goals, managing resource, all of this, all that language is laden with a very particular cognitive function viewpoint or bent, which is the cognitive function or decision-making function of extroverted thinking or effectiveness. We've nicknamed it effectiveness. This is the decision-making function that all TJs in the Myers-Briggs system use. So INTJs, ISTJs, ENTJs, ESTJs use this as the best way to make decisions. If you notice, in most organizations, there's an awful lot of TJs in both management and leadership. Places like the military, business, anywhere there's a hierarchy, and the hierarchy needs to be navigated, and resource needs to be managed, and projects need to happen. Like outer world things have to be done, and people have to be organized. Often you'll find a lot of TJ personality types gathered and clustered in those realms, those energies, those organizations. So I think that's naturally when we think about leadership, we almost unconsciously, even if we don't know personality type, we assume that it's a extroverted thinking effectiveness user at the helm often. But there's other styles of leadership, not just extroverted thinking or effectiveness leadership. I would argue that each of the judging functions has a different style. You, Antonia, as your best fit type ENTP, you don't use extroverted thinking or effectiveness. You actually make your best decisions with introverted thinking, or what we've nicknamed accuracy. This is about logical, consistent, congruent thought, about what makes sense to you logically, all the internal logic inside your own mind. And so you mentioned at the very beginning of this episode that when you think about leadership, you don't really naturally think about the structural, hierarchical, organizational leadership. You think of, and you said it, thought leadership. Mm-hmm. You think of influencing the way people think inside their brains, what they believe, how clean their thoughts are, how they're organizing information inside their head. This is the style that you lend yourself to because, well, that would make sense. That's how you're wired. So when you show up to leadership, you're probably going to do it through the lens or the channel of trying to influence thought in other people, get them to change or calibrate their thoughts. And so I think that's another style of leadership. And as you're listening, just as we go through these 4 judging functions, just kind of like get a sense of which one you resonate with as we talk about it. Anything you want to add to that before I keep going? Because I can list these out and then we can unpack it.
Yeah. So I think that's also why self-leadership is so much more interesting to me, because there's a quality in introverted thinking or accuracy that's about self-amelioration. Yeah. Whereas I think you're right. We naturally tend to think of extroverted thinking or effectiveness as a leadership function because that focuses on ameliorating systems.
It's also obvious in the outer world. We can see it.
That's right. It's more outcome focused. Whereas introverted thinking or accuracy is more process focused. Yeah. I'm way more interested in the process of something, and I just assume the outcome will take care of itself. And I don't really want to be responsible for the outcome. I just want to make sure that the process is really good. And that's not usually what we think of when we think of leadership. But in thought leadership, it's helpful because thinking is a process. And so that is what I tend to gravitate towards. For you, using introverted feeling or authenticity, what's your leadership style?
I'll just say that introverted thinking accuracy is used by all TPs in the Myers-Briggs system. So INTPs, ISTPs, ENTPs, and ESTPs will use this as their best decision-making tool in their cognition. And this is they probably have a proclivity toward thought leadership. For me, I have ENFP best fit type preferences. I use the judging or decision-making function of introverted feeling. We've nicknamed it authenticity. This is all about inner alignment, congruity of core values, about motivation, desire, tracking intentions, understanding intention. I think the style of leadership that often FPs, so this is the judging function, decision-making function used by all FPs in the Myers-Briggs system. So INFPs, ENFPs, ISFPs, ESFPs. I think it's inspirational leadership. It's creating desire in other people. It's creating motivation in other people. It's getting them excited or attuned to what's possible inside of themselves. So it's an introverted function. It looks at the inside. It's not as obvious in the outer world, but it's trying to reach into someone's heart and inspire them to greatness, inspire them to something more, inspire them to feel successful or on purpose or on mission. And so I think that inspiration comes through in the leadership style of a lot of FPs. Now, we can all tap into all of these. I can tap into thought leadership and external leadership or inspirational leadership. I don't think we're just locked down by personality type to one. But I do think that we tend to lend ourselves toward one of these based on how we're wired. Mm-hmm. And then finally, the final judging function that we could talk about is another feeling function. It's extroverted feeling. We've nicknamed it harmony. It's about getting needs met in the outer world. It's about the feelings out here between people, social groups, entire organizations or countries or societies, or all the way down just to a small family unit. It's about really creating the harmony in a social space, no matter the scale of what that looks like. And again, harmony or extroverted feeling is used by all FJ types in the Myers-Briggs system. So INFJs, ENFJs, ISFJs, ESFJs use harmony or extroverted feeling. And I think that's a very social leadership frame. So it's about, consensus, possibly committee, about making sure all voices are heard. Everybody gets a voice, gets an opinion, gets a vote. I think there's a lot of social, and also keeping the social fabric together, like helping guide people groups towards something. So it could be allowing everybody to have a voice, but it'll also be, I will lead this forward and get everybody's needs met. I'll drive what needs to happen. I'll make the single voice, but it's on everybody else's behalf. It's a social leadership frame.
Well, and I think that cooperation is really a part of this.
It's a great word.
And I don't think that all people who use extroverted feeling or harmony, I think I've always had a tendency to see it as consensus oriented. And I do think it can be consensus oriented. I think that is a lower level of it though.
Coalition, would that be a better word for you?
No, I think cooperation is the higher order word. And the reason why I've seen people who use extroverted feeling or harmony very much understand the importance of hierarchy. Right? They get that one of the needs that people have is a strong leader to follow. And so I think it's more about cooperation regardless of where the person is at. Yeah. And making sure that everybody's getting their need. Like even if you are at a place that most people would think is not that important, your role's still important, you're still important, your needs need to be met so you'll show up every day. And so it's a matter of making sure that there is sort of the glue between people in these human systems.
I'm going to make you do thought labor.
Oh, okay.
I need you to help me make a distinction about something in my own mind, if you would be willing.
Yeah.
The reason why I think the word consensus or coalition makes more sense is because often FJ types will use, in order to lead, they will use shunning or shaming to push somebody out of the group. They'll create a consensus around the people that are bought in with them to move forward. And anyone that's not bought in that, everyone, like they can't get full cooperation because the rogue elements are there. So the best, I mean, I guess that's an ideal. I don't know if that could ever be achieved, but cooperation would not exclude somebody by disapproving of them. Disapproval is we have consensus here. If you don't join in the consensus, you're on the outs. And that's how we lead as FJs. I think that's how I have it in my head. So if you can maybe calibrate how what you said and how I'm thinking about this.
Yeah.
Like, how am I thinking about that differently? Or how am I thinking about that uncalibratedly?
Well, I mean, I guess it would depend on the context that the leadership is in, but I would still insist that cooperation is a better word than consensus.
Okay.
Because the person who is hemorrhaged out isn't a person who isn't agreeing. It's a person who is not cooperating with their role.
Okay.
And so on some, like when a person
appointed role or role they naturally own themselves,
the role that they need to be doing in this ecosystem.
Gotcha.
Right. The role that they either went for themselves or were assigned or whatever, but in this ecosystem, everybody's got a role.
Yeah.
And if you're not like you can be as sour as you want to. And I mean, when extroverted feeling or harmony is at a higher level of leadership, I think when it's at a lower level of leadership, it wants consensus because it wants everybody's mind to be in alignment with each other. It has a bit of a fantasy around introverted thinking or accuracy that we could somehow make it so that everybody's programmed to think the same thing. I think when somebody who has this function has integrated introverted thinking, they know that's not possible. Everybody's going to be thinking different things because they have owned that they themselves are not in alignment with everybody else on everything. So they've integrated the part of themselves that understands that you cannot do mind control. It's just not possible. And that's why consensus is a nice to have. If everybody's in consensus, that's great. But it's an ideal. It's not going to always happen. But I don't really need you to like your job. I just need you to do your job. It's kind of an extroverted thinking or effectiveness way of looking at it. And I think extroverted feeling or harmony is more like, you don't have to like your job. I'll do everything I can to make your job better for you, but it still needs to be done. Yeah. So can you cooperate, please? Can you get part of this group? And if we all cooperate, we'll get this done together. Many hands make light work, right? Okay. And so I think that's why I would say cooperation is the higher order than consensus. And I think every single one of these functions we're talking about has a higher and a lower order, like effectiveness, extroverted thinking. At a lower order, it's just about getting everybody to do their job, like make it happen. And I'll throw money at you, or I'll just, you're replaceable. I'll build a system to do it instead of a human. And, and if you don't do your job, you're out. I'm firing you, right? Yeah. Whereas when extroverted thinking or effectiveness is at a higher order, they have great appreciation for every person who's filling these positions. And while the position might not need that specific human being, there's still like a sense of honor and respect that person is doing their job well. And then they find more opportunities for that person to do those kinds of jobs. They start talent scouting them and looking for ways to like sort of leverage them and give them a place where they feel a higher sense of purpose. Yeah. Because I think they understand that every person, if they've tapped into and integrated their introverted feeling or authenticity, everybody needs to feel inspired. They need to feel like they're doing something with their life, right? This is the one human experience they get, and everybody needs to feel like whatever they're doing with this human experience was worth something. So the higher level, higher order extroverted thinking or effectiveness honors that person needs to have a sense of purpose. Just like a higher order extroverted feeling or harmony understands that everybody gets to have their own thoughts and opinions on things. Yeah. Yeah. Did that help? Was that the thought labor you're looking for?
Absolutely. In fact, you changed my mind on it, or you kind of switched it. I was seeing the cooperation as the ideal, but I think the consensus is actually more the ideal. I think cooperation is probably more the real of it. Mm-hmm. And I agree with you. I think that, thank you, by the way, for helping clarify that for me.